Long building, and in the convict era it probably felt even longer. You see this wall up here? That was not there when the convicts were there. That wall was built in the 1890s to provide 4 separate divisions. There are 3 of those walls. So in the convict era you could see all the way through to the other end of the building. That's the first thing to keep in mind. Now this section here is a little bit different to the upper landings and the remainder of the building. The heritage workers wanted this to feel like 1855. So it is the exposed limestone walls, whereas on the upper landings it's covered with concrete render. The render went on in the 1860s because the problem was that this limestone, while it looks beautiful, is soft and crumbly. Right, but it was local, it was on site, it was nice and easy. But the rodents, the rats, the mice, the cockroaches, the insects were all coming through the walls. And so the concrete render was put in to see if they could protect people from it. It didn't work overly well. The rodent infestations continued all the way through to 1993. The other major difference is the floor. It's concrete over there, and the concrete was poured in 1981. So only the last 10 years of the prison's life. Up till then, everybody was walking on the flagstones. Now, as you can imagine, the colony has very little industry, very little manufacturing. So local materials were important, and whatever could be salvaged from the convict ships. So these flagstones were ballast in the bottom of the convict ships. And the British get very excited when I tell them it's Yorkshire flagstone. Apparently it's very, very expensive, very hard to get a hold of. And here we are, we have it on our floors. So they all look like, can I lift it? No, you can't. The landings, the roof, and the staircases and the door frames are all made of West Australian jarrah. That was a real boon to the colonists because it's a very wide, tall tree, very strong, durable wood, as well as being beautiful. So a lot of jarrah trees and old growth forests were logged and used in various constructions. So that's what we've seen there. The railings are also from the convict ships, salvaged iron, as well as the lamp hooks. You can see them as you work your way up the wall, and they used to have oil lamps coming through them to light the building. But we did get electricity in 1912. We don't do many things early here in Western Australia. That was one of them. That and the female boat. The doors themselves were not manufactured here. They were built in Britain and then brought over and installed into the door frames. So it was straight in, all on layers of paint on, but the doors are original from 1855 as well. Which brings us to the cell itself. They're really small, 7 foot long, 4 foot wide, or 2.1 metres by 1.2. Having said that, the thinking at the time was that kids would sleep in here, but they wouldn't spend any other time here. So they would eat their breakfast, their dinner, sleep, but their days were spent out working. This was not a place for recreation time at all. I don't know if that excuses it, but that was the thinking at the time. blankets. We've got a table and a stool. And on the table, they would find a Bible and a prayer book. This is a system of punishment, but reform was also very, very important. The idea was these convicts would become good, productive members of society and stay in the colony. So read your Bible, read your prayer book, and all will be well. Fresh water bucket down the back. And every convict was locked in his cell at 6 p.m. to eat his dinner and woken up at about 5 a.m. So then come the toilet buckets. Now this is pretty normal for the 1800s, yes? Go to the toilet in your bucket overnight. However, this building has no plumbing, and in November of 1991, they were still using the bucket system here in this prison. So it was one of the features of the notoriety of Fremantle prison, I guess, is the old bucket system. It's not a terrible prison by any stretch of the imagination, but it really should have been closed down sometime in the 1970s or very early 1990s. Yeah. Now the system itself, transportation, it was an old system. They've been using it already for centuries, sending British convicts off to various colonial outposts around the world. It comes in 4 stages here in Western Australia. A lot of lessons have been learned from the past, in particular the way the convict system worked in the eastern states of Australia. So those lessons have been learned, and this was their version of improving it. But at the time in the 1800s, every convict had to begin his sentence with a period of separate confinement. It's part of an ideology called the separate system. So when a prisoner first comes in, we cannot associate with other prisoners. So this was a 9-month period of isolation, and for most of the convicts sent here, they did that already in Britain. Then they would get on a ship, and it takes 80 to 90 days to sail from Britain to Western Australia, and they would start a public works program. So this is where they're building the government buildings and the roads and whatnot. If I can find my pictures in the right order. They would work on various programs. Some of them would be wearing a uniform like this. This is called the magpie or harlequin uniform. Very coarse fabric, very uncomfortable, and very visible. If you were wearing that uniform, you were also working in chains. But that was only just like a core group of convicts, not all of them. Many of them would have just been wearing basic pants and a shirt. And I've got a little picture here which I really like. This one's in front of Government House. It's a photograph taken in the 1860s. So there's a gentleman and lady in the background and a couple of convicts working in the gardens just in the foreground. So nothing too disastrous, just a couple of workers out in the gardens. And so once they'd finished, I'm just going to sweep up here, once they'd finished their public works program, they could go on their ticket of leave. The ticket of leave is really important. It's this document here. At this point, they would leave the prison and they would go and find their own job and their own housing. They had to keep this document in their pocket, show it if anybody ever asks for it. If they wanted to change districts, change jobs, change housing, they needed to have permission to do it. They needed to check with the magistrate every 6 months. Be home by 10 p.m. Do not be found drunk at the pub or on the street. Do not get into any kind of trouble at all for the duration of your ticket of leave. And then your restrictions lift and you can go on your conditional pardon. They could start their own business, they could work for a farmer, they could in fact purchase land so long as they had permission. However, how well you can do on your ticket of leave is reliant on how well the society is functioning. If work is hard to find, then you're going to find it very difficult on your ticket of leave. If housing is hard to find, you're going to find it very hard to make sure that you're behaving properly and can move through your ticket of leave. So in the early years it was a little bit difficult. In the later years things became a little bit easier. So we're going to go upstairs and talk a bit more about that ticket of leave. We are going up 2 flights of stairs to the second landing. You can see the open door up there. Just be careful when you go through the doorway because it's 1 step up. showing the different districts and the different locations of various public Anybody in front of you? Where are you travelling from? You drove?
Yes, all the way.
How exciting! Just through the middle or down the bottom?
Down the bottom. That's when I lost all my signals along the way. I can't make phone calls and
Nice.
everything, so I'm lost.
All right, stop, sir. Stop! We're going far enough. All right, I'd like to make a quick stop here in case anybody's got any questions. Do you think they were? They did look like bloodstains, didn't they? It was a library in the 1980s. And before that, it was an education room for the male prisoners. Before that, it was an education room for the juveniles, 10 to 17 years of age, that we had here in the maximum security prison. And they were beaten with birch sticks, you know, the collection of twigs, but they are not bloodstains. Because it was a schoolroom, they were using ink pens and filling up their ink pens. And it's actually, you can see the rectangle shadow of the desk and the ink's just fallen off the end there. So good up. Another thing people ask about is the net here, because we didn't see this in Division 1. And that's because the convicts did not have a safety net. If they jumped, they landed on the floor. This was put in 1923, so it's part of the modern prison. And while it catches bodies, I like to think of it as a projectile catcher, because every morning at unlock, you have all these male prisoners with their bucket. And the bucket goes over, and it's called the Fremantle brown shower, because the contents of the bucket goes all the way to the floor. Pretty gross. People also ask me about the cells, because we saw the cell, it's very small, isn't it? But these cells, there are 2 doors, 1 number. All right? So in the 1890s, they finally agreed to make the cells bigger. So they took away the wall on the inside. Okay, so remove this wall, take the lock off this door, weld it shut, and now you have 1 cell behind 2 doors. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's why they're only numbered on every 2nd door. But it wasn't until the 1890s, so the convicts always only had those very small cells. So it's quite nice to get the experience of going to church, and we are going to church, folks. Through door C, immediately left, be careful up the steps, but then there's a chance to sit down. Would you like to lead on, sir? Yeah. go to the black gates that we came in on, straight out the gatehouse. It is your pathway to freedom. Now, some convicts were still in their separate confinements. They can't sit in the queues like you are, because then they can talk to each other. They would have to sit up there, and on the floor there were cubicles, so little panels that they would sit in between, so that they couldn't talk to each other. But they get the best view. From up there, we look to the top of the windows, over the gatehouse, straight out to the ocean. So they live a life of sense of freedom. So they all had to come to church on a Sunday morning for the big service and 2 prayer services every other day of the week. Well, not necessarily, the building wasn't necessarily full at all times. Right? They would go in church shifts as well throughout the course of the day. Because in fact, guards and their families were required to come to church there as well. So they would enter through the staircase at the front, rather than coming from inside the prison as well. Now, not all convicts were church people. Some of them were Catholic, and they did not want to have their church service in here. They would like to have their church services out and around them. That was as good as it got from Catholics. One of my favourite things about this room, though, is the roof and those curved beams. Because when the engineers were building the chapel, they wanted arches, that there was no iron boundary, there was no brickworks, and they had to think about how they were going to make arches. So they had laminated beams, 10 planks of jarrah each beam, sandwiched together, and then held over steam to get the band in. And then sandwiched iron from under chips to hold it all together. I was thinking of stunning. What ever it is that? And there are ways to be free a little bit quicker when you're a convict here in Western Australia. You could volunteer to sing in the church choir, and that will get you some time after a sentence. You could also do something like paint the mural. Now, Charles Hamilton was a convict with artistic skills, and he was commissioned to paint the Lord's Prayer, the 10 Commandments, and the Protestant Apostles' Creed. And he received 12 months of his sentence for having done it. And underneath, you can see that some of the paintwork has been scraped away. There's at least 2 more murals underneath. So in a 10-year period, they gave 3 convicts a chance to get time off their sentence by painting murals. So I think it's kind of cool, and will become important a little bit later. Now, while you're seated, I'm going to tell you the story of a convict whose nickname was Moonlight Joe. And he was one of the very early convicts. So those convicts had already been in prison in Britain for quite a long time. So when he arrived, he went straight on his ticket of leave. He did not have to stay here at the establishment. Now, he got into a bit of trouble because he was riding a horse that he said was his, and the police said, that is not your horse. And they arrested him, and they put him in the country town lockup. Now, he had his dinner spoon, and he used his spoon to take the pins out of the hinges of the cell door, removed the door, and walked outside, and there was his horse tied to the veranda. So he rode off with his horse. And the police caught him and brought him back. Because, spoiler alert, you can escape, but you will always be found and brought back to the establishment. So they caught him and they brought him here, and he escaped from here. And then they caught him and they brought him back, and he escaped. And then they caught him and brought him back. And this was becoming a very funny story in the colony. It was on the front pages of the newspaper. Moonlight Joe gets away from the governor. Can the governor hatch? Moonlight Joe. And people thought this was really quite amusing. They were not afraid of Moonlight Joe. It was actually well known if he came into your house and took your belongings, he would make sure that you did not get hurt. So they were not afraid of him. But the governor was angry. He was so angry. And he said to his son's actually in charge of the prison. And he says to his son, make an escape-proof room. And that's what we're going to go see next. It is a small convict cell. And when we have a look at it, it has a tray floor just like this one, very hard wood. They put more jarrah on the floor. They are under the ceiling of jarrah, the walls with jarrah, bolted down with iron bolts. They reinforced the door, and they put 3 more layers of bars and metal grill on his windows. There was no way he was ever getting out of this got Moonlight Joe in there, we're going to go have a look at Moonlight Joe's cell. Be careful when you walk out of this door. If you're taller than me, the door is a bit shorter on the side, okay? Just watch you step in there and go upstairs. For starters, we do have the photograph. This is from 1988, so nothing to do with the convicts. But the prisoners had enough of the prison. By 1988, they started a riot and they set fire to the roof. So this was a result of the damage done. And can you see the triangle at the top, and it's got the metal arrow on it? And you can see it if you look up on some of these roof trusses, you can see that metal arrow. That indicates that the building was built by British convicts. It's the British Royal Arrow. And this roof, of course, is the new roof. As you look down, you can see the old Jarrah trusses, and you can see that they're blackened on the top section from the fire. Yeah. So this new roof is an exact replica of the convict-built one, except it's not Jarrah, because there's not enough Jarrah left. All right, Moonlight Joe's cell. Here and immediately left, come and have a look, and then walk on down. There are two more open cells. Be careful when you step inside them because it's a bit of a step over. We'll have a look and I'll tell you about them
Oh yeah, this is a cell. The wooden cell. But it's cell very nice.
So anybody through the artwork in it was a mystery for a very long time. Remember that the concrete render was used to cover over all the walls. So all that artwork extra large cell. And you'll see it's matched on this side with another pair above us and another pair below us. By the time they got to the end of this building, when they were still in construction, the governor said, "We need more hammocks." So they said, "Fine, we'll just make triple-sized cells and put more hammocks in it." So that's all that they're about. So let's go sit in this very last room. Another chance to sit down. We waiting on anybody? Or just you? Okay, cool. All right, come back. Okay, so here we are in church again. Because we let our Catholics having their services on the land of Fremantle. And the local Catholics in the Fremantle community, they were busy agitating this to give us a chapel. And London said, they're allowed to have their services, but we will not give them any space. But the local Catholics had some money, and they said, if you can give us the space, we will do all the furnishings, so we have to pay for it. So this space was given to the Catholics, and it has bars and windows, because this was an association ward, just like the library one where it is today. So this is the mirror image of the far side of the room. So they were allowed to have this space. And I've always wondered what was going on in that space. Because of course it's a very big room, but the chapel is quite small. Now apparently in the 1900s, the dentist had his office behind the chapel. Don't get your teeth pulled, pray for a solution, now to go. Now this has been redone in the 1950s. We have this lovely retro panel in here. And the mural was also done in the 1950s, in 1956. And during COVID, of course, we had no visitors. And the heritage workers were very excited because they had a free run of the prison to put where they wanted. And they took a few layers of paint off. It's just in this bottom left corner. 2 more murals underneath this one. And the first mural is white, with white ink, done with a very fine brush, just like Selby 33. So then they went, hallelujah, I think we may have solved the mystery of Selby 33. Now James Walsh was a convict who was here for forgery, and he was released, and then he committed another crime, and he came back to the establishment, and that's when he stayed in cell B33. So what we think is, knowing about Charles Hamilton from the Church of England, James Walsh was probably asked to do a mural here, and was allowed to practice in his cell. That's the best we can come up with. We do have some of his artwork in the art gallery in Perth City. It's in storage. Various exhibitions at certain times. So that is the best solution to the mystery that we can come up with. Now, in terms of the fire and the riot that was here in 1988, cool story about the Catholic Chapel. In order to make the roof burn, you have to get the fire to it. So that was part of the big plan of how to get the fire to the roof. The best place to reach the roof is from in here, because it's right there. Right? So part of the plan was to come into the Catholic Chapel and set fire to the roof in here in 1988. And one of the prisoners here, he knew about this plan, and he was a Catholic and he was very concerned about the religious items at the altar. So he ran in and he grabbed all the important things, went back to his cell, put them under his bed before the rioters came in, because the rioters, they had chairs in the chapel, just those collapsible stackable chairs, and they threw everything around, and they piled everything in the centre of the floor and set fire to it. So he rescued everything before the rioters got in. Always fun and games in the Catholic chapel, right? Plenty going on. We have another story to tell that's very important. As we spoke about 3 conditions that we gave the British for our convicts. They had to all be male, yes. All petty criminals and first-time offenders, yeah, not so much. But they did their best. But remember the third one was no political prisoners. And the very last boatload of convicts came in 1868. There were something like 270 convicts on board, and 63 of them were political prisoners. And they had come from Ireland, and they had made a plan to throw the British out of Ireland and take Ireland back to the Irish. And some of them were here for life because they were convicted of treason against the British government. And they really did not want to stay here. And they had the record as being the only people to have escaped the convict establishment or Fremantle prison and not be returned or die in the trial. They're really amazing people. One of them managed to escape by ship. Easy to get out of here, but you end up in the desert or you end up in the forest and somebody will catch you. And this guy, he got on a ship. Now that is treason against the British government, but he made it, and he made it all the way to the United States of America. And then he bought a ship, a whaling ship. As you do. He bought a ship, and it sailed here to Western Australia, and it anchored in international waters. And in the meantime, so that's it there, the Tower. It went whaling and it just kept sailing to Western Australia. In the meantime, 2 Irish Americans came here to stay and work, and they were trying to come up with a plan. And they did, they came up with a plan. It wasn't a very good plan. It went south really, really quickly. And then they had to come up with a new plan, and then they had to come up with a new plan. Imagine this is very, very dangerous. But in the end, 6 Irish rebels escaped from this building here. They managed to get to the beach and they started rowing out to the Catawba. It was going to be a 15-kilometre road. And then a storm came up and it was dark and it was wet and there were big waves and they thought they were going to die. So they slept at the bottom of the rowboat. And then the big question was, why was nobody chasing these Irish rebels who had escaped? And it was because there were very few guards here. Most of them had taken a day off. They went to Perth City to watch the sailing races. So when the alarm was raised, I said, it's fine. We have an English ship of war in Albany. We'll send them a telegraph and they will sail out and meet the Catawba. But somebody had cut the telegraph wires. So they had to get a steamship. This poor steamship captain, he just takes passengers from Perth to Albany up to Port Gregory, and the police take over this steamship. And he says, you cannot take this steamship into international waters. We do not have enough coal. And I said, well, we're going anyway. But of course there was a storm. And then they realised they had not enough coal. So they came back to Fremantle and they loaded it up with coal. And while they were at it, they put a cannon on the deck of the steamship. So the next morning, the storm is all over. Our Irish rebels keep rowing and they go to the Catawba and they get on the boat. Now what we want them to do is sail away swiftly, yeah? But there's no wind. So the sailing ship is stuck. The steamship, on the other hand, does not need wind. So it steams out past Rottnest, it sees the Catawba, comes up alongside. And the police captain says, give us back our Irish rebels. And they stand on the deck of the ship and go, we don't know what we're talking about. It's just a flat no. Now the steamship is big enough, it has enough people on it, it has enough weapons on it to board the Catawba. This is a really big problem. The steamship has a cannon and it lets the cannon shot off across the bow of the Catawba. What do we do now? But then the captain of the Catawba says, I have an idea. And he raises the American flag. And he says, would you like to cause a diplomatic incident with the United States of America in international waters? great punishments for them, and that's where we're going next. We're going out the back to the punishment yards. 2 flights down to the ground, and we'll go outside. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
It's okay. I think it should be fine.
You don't realise how stale it is in here till you get back to the fresh air. All right, guys, I'm just going to get you to come back through this way. So this is the Division 3 exercise yard, and it has nothing to do with convicts, because the convicts did not have an exercise yard. They worked 6 days a week, and they went to church on the 7th. So this is for the modern day prisoner. We're going to the punishment yard, which is on the other side of that wall. So we're just going to walk through, there's a doorway in the bottom right hand corner. That's where we're heading.
I didn't mean second surprise.
Expected to be avoid conduct, any behaviour that disrupts the good order of the establishment is eligible for further punishment. So this is solitary confinement, which is an example of a secondary punishment, and it's also referred to as a refractory lock, if you would like a really fancy word for it. So there are lots of ways you could disrupt the good order of the establishment, like whistling during mealtimes, singing of an afternoon, talking with the plumber or the tradesman in the yard if you were not given permission, escaping your work party, assaulting an officer, bushranging after your escape, tearing down posters off the yard walls without permission, sharing your blanket with another convict without permission is also an infraction against the good order of the establishment. So the whole lot of you can get into solitary and Oh, they didn't even notice.
You wish got someone in here.
No, we're not lucky yet.
Hey,
Alright, feel free to keep moving around. So we're not closing anything. There's always someone, right? So this building, built in 1855, it was the same year the convicts first moved into the main division. And the governor was the one who insisted on the extra form of punishment. However, the superintendent, he said, no, we don't need more punishment, we need more reform. But the governor won the argument. But the superintendent did say, don't make the convicts build their own solitary confinement. That's really cruel. So it was built by a private contracting company. And what I find so fascinating about this building is there are all these architectural design layers to ensure that your mental anguish is great. So it starts off with the fact that solitary confinement is 23 hours a day in your cell, by yourself, with 1 hour of isolated exercise. The minimum punishment is 1 month, anything up to 6 months. If that's not bad enough, you don't get a hammock, you get blankets, Bible and your bucket. If that's not bad enough, your normal diet is removed and you get bread and water only for your meals. And then we can add to it. So over that is the daytime cells. You see the daylight and you get some fresh air. These are the nighttime cells. The windows are blocked off. No airflow as such coming through the windows and no light coming through those windows either. Then they have another mechanism. We've got double doors. They're nice and strong. They're nice and thick. So sound is going to be reduced. The walls are relatively thick. They're 70% thick between the cells and the corridors, the cells on the outside. Then there is the distance between the front or the external and internal doors. Quite a small distance at this end of the block. As you move down there, the distance grows.